Hello friends, in today's video I will tell you the summary of Joseph Conrad's masterpiece Heart of Darkness. In the last video I have discussed the context and the characters of this novel. If you have not watched that video, first make sure to watch it. It will help you to follow today's lesson. At the beginning of today's lesson, I will discuss briefly the complex narrative technique of Heart of Darkness. Conrad uses the frame narrative, a story within a story, and double narrator. Heart of Darkness begins and ends on a ship named Nelly, stranded on the Thames near London, where 5 men on board the ship, the director of companies, the lawyer, the accountant, the narrator, and Marlowe, old friends from their seafaring days, settle down to await the changing of the tide. The real story is the one Marlowe tells us as he and the rest of the crew sit bored and restless in the middle of a dark night. Marlowe's story is told to the reader by the anonymous narrator who listens to Marlowe on the deck of the Nile. The anonymous narrator is the frame narrator who begins and ends the narrative and thus provides a frame to Marlowe's story. We may wonder why Conrad would make Heart of Darkness a frame tale at all and not simply begin with Marlowe telling the story, as many first-person narratives do. The reason is that Conrad's frame narrator, like the reader, learns that his ideas about European imperialism are founded on a number of lies that he has wholeheartedly believed. By the end of the novel, Marlowe's tale significantly changes the narrator's attitude towards the ships and the men of the past. Heart of Darkness consists of 3 long chapters. In each chapter, there are series of episodes that are roughly represents significant stages of Marlowe's expedition. Before I proceed further, I want to ask a question. The question is, whom does Marlowe call a paper mache Mephistopheles? These are your options. If you have watched the last video, you will be able to answer it very easily. Let's begin our discussion with the first chapter. The novel opens with the description of Thames estuary at the end of the day. The 5 men on board the Nile are in a silent, pensive mood. The first narrator remembers the legendary ships and men of English history who set sail from the Thames on voyages of trade or conquest, carrying with them the dreams of men, the seeds of commonwealths, the germs of empire, and contributed to the wealth and fame of their country and sometimes carried the torch of civilization to the end of the earth. The narrator's thoughts about conquest and colonialism are conventional and romantic. But Marlowe takes an opposite view. He imagines England as it must have appeared to the first Romans who came to conquer it, a savage, mysterious, one of the dark places of the earth. Marlowe adds that conquest is never pretty. Colonialism is always ruthless and usually involves the powerful taking land from those who look different and are less powerful. It appears beautiful only by the ideas behind them, ideas such as civilizing the savages. These ideas are so beautiful that men bow down before them. Marlowe then reminds the other men that he once served as captain of a freshwater riverboat and begins to tell his story. As a young boy, he had a passion for maps and unknown places. As he grew older, many of those places became known and many he visited himself. Yet Africa still fascinated him, especially its mighty river, the Congo. After years of ocean voyages, Marlowe asked his aunt to use her influence in a continental company that worked in Congo to help him to get a job as a steamship operator. The company hires him immediately in a place of one of its captains, a Dane named Fresleven, who had recently been killed. Fresleven was normally mild-mannered but had started hitting an old village chief with a cane over a disagreement regarding 2 black hens and was accidentally killed by the chief's son. Marlowe travels to Brussels, here the unnamed European city, where the company has its headquarters. He describes the city as a whited sepulchre. It is a biblical phrase referring to a hypocrite or person who employs a facade of goodness to mask his or her true malignancy. At the company's office, Marlowe finds two women who constantly knit black wool. They symbolize fate or death. There Marlowe examines a map of Africa filled in by various colors representing the European countries that colonized these areas. He briefly meets the head of the company, then is directed to a doctor. While measuring Marlowe's head, the doctor comments that in Africa, the changes happen inside and asks Marlowe if his family has a history of insanity. When Marlowe goes to say goodbye to his aunt, he realizes that she sees him as an emissary of light who will educate the African natives out of their horrid ways. Marlowe points out to his aunt that the company is run for profit, not missionary work, and expresses amazement to his friends on the boat how ignorant women are of the truth. Marlowe travels to Africa on a French steamer. To Marlowe, the forested coast of Africa looks like an impenetrable enigma. He occasionally sees canoes paddled by sturdy native Africans and once sees a French ship firing its guns insanely and incomprehensibly into the dense forest, although someone assures Marlowe they are firing at enemies. At the mouth of Congo, Marlowe boards a small steamer that will take him 30 miles upriver to company's outer station. The captain of the boat is a young Swede. He mocks the government chaps at the shore as men who will do anything for money and wonders what happens to such men when they get further into the continent. The Swede then told Marlowe a short yet ominous story about a man he took upriver who hanged himself on the road. Eventually, they arrived at the outer station, which amounted to 3 wooden buildings on the side of a rocky slope. Out of the station was shipped the company's most important and lucrative commodity, ivory. Here, Marlowe comes into contact for the first time with the reality of the colonial exploitation. It is a chaotic and disorganized place. Machinery rusts everywhere. Black laborers blast away at a cliff face for no reason. Black slaves, chained to each other with an iron collar on their necks, carry baskets of earth from one place to another. Marlowe comments to the men on the nail that he had long known the lusty devils of violence and greed that drive men, but in Africa encountered a flabby, pretending, weak-eyed devil of rapacious and pitiless folly. The lusty devils are the desires that move men to act badly, but without deception. The pretending devils move men to fake their noble intentions for greedy ends. When Marlowe walks down to the river to keep out of their way, he stumbles upon a nightmarish scene, what he calls the Grove of Death. The ghostly figures of dying natives, overworked, starved, and too weak to move. They are living out of their last moments in the shade of the ancient trees. Marlowe feels he has stepped into the gloomy circle of some inferno. Horror-struck, he climbs towards the station and meets a white man elegantly and spotlessly dressed in white. This is the chief accountant. Marlowe sincerely admires and respects him for his impeccable appearance and perfect keeping of his books, especially in the midst of the chaos of outer station. The accountant, however, cannot stand the groans of a dying man left in his office temporarily, complaining that this distracted him and increased the chances of clerical errors. To the company, as embodied in the accountant, profits is more important than human life. One day, the chief accountant mentions that further up the river, Marlowe will probably meet Mr. Kirst, a company agent in charge of a station deep in the interior. He described Kirst as a first-class agent and remarkable person whose station brought in more ivory than all the other stations combined, and who will be somebody in the company administration before long. He asks Marlowe to tell Kirst that all is satisfactory, saying he doesn't want to send a letter for fear that rivals at the central station will intercept it. After 10 days, Marlowe starts on a 200-mile trek upriver the central station with a caravan of 60 men. Marlowe saw innumerable paths cut through the jungle and a number of abandoned villages along the way. He saw a drunken white man who claimed to be looking after the upkeep of a road and the body of a native who was shot in the head. Marlowe's one white companion was an overweight man who kept fainting due to the heat. Eventually, he had to be carried in a hammock, and when the hammock skinned his nose and was dropped by the natives, he demanded that Marlowe do something to punish them. Marlowe did nothing except press onward until they reached the central station. After a 15-day trek through the jungle, Marlowe reaches the station and sees the waste of the colonial effort just keep growing and growing. He is told the ship he has to steer was at the bottom of the river. Apparently, the general manager had suddenly decided to try to reach Kursk at the inner station with an inexperienced pilot. The steamship promptly sank. Marlowe suspects that it is possible the general manager wanted the steamship to sink. Immediately after his arrival at the central station, Marlowe is taken to the general manager, who does not even invite him to sit down after his 20 miles walk in the jungle that day. The manager is thoroughly unremarkable in intelligence, leadership, and unskilled at even maintaining order. He inspires only uneasiness because there was nothing within him. He is the pretending devils Marlowe mentioned earlier. The general manager explains he took the steamship onto the river before Marlowe arrived because Kursk, the company's best agent, is sick. The general manager takes special interest when Marlowe mentions he heard Kursk's name mentioned on the coast. The general manager estimates that it will take 3 months to repair the ship and turns out to be almost exactly right. The general manager's concern for Kursk is obviously false. On the day after his arrival, Marlowe sits down to work and repair the boat, but he cannot do so because of lack of rivets. He knows there are plenty of rivets at the outer station and that a messenger travels there from the central station every week, but he will have to wait about 2 months before he gets any. He is surprised that the manager proved to be right in his prediction that the steamer would take 3 months to repair. Marlowe notices the various company agents at the central station do no work and dream of ivory and wealth. This seems to be the case with the brickmaker, a first-class agent supposed to be making bricks, which he never does. He is the essence of hollowness, hypocrisy, and inefficiency. The other agents think he is the general manager's spy. The various other company agents of the central station also do no work, stroll about aimlessly, and dream of ivory and wealth. Marlowe describes the place as unreal. Meanwhile, a fire breaks out and an obviously innocent African is cruelly beaten up for it. While others ineffectually try to stop the fire, Marlowe starts a conversation with the brickmaker, who invites him to his hut where Marlowe finds Kursk painting. The painting depicts a woman, blindfolded, carrying a lighted torch. As they talk, brickmaker pressed him for information about the company's activities in Europe because Marlowe's aunt's contacts in the company are the same people who sent Kursk to Africa. When Marlowe confessed to knowing nothing about the secret intrigues of the company, the brickmaker assumed he was lying and became annoyed. The brickmaker bitterly says that Marlowe and Kursk are both of the new gang, the Gang of Virtue, meant to bring proper morals and European enlightenment to the colonial activities in Africa. Marlowe realizes that both the general manager and the brickmaker see Kursk as a threat to their dreams of advancement. Marlowe calls the brickmaker a paper-mache Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles is a devil. Paper-mache is a craft that produces hollow structures. A paper-mache Mephistopheles is therefore a hollow devil and a heck of an insult. Marlowe told his mechanic, a boiler maker, that their rivets would be arriving shortly. Marlowe assumed that the brickmaker thought Marlowe had great influence in Europe and was eager to please him. However, weeks pass and the rivets don't arrive. Instead, a group of pilgrims calling itself El Dorado exploring expedition arrives, led by the general manager's uncle. They are all greedy, cowardly, and without any sort of foresight or understanding of work. Here the first chapter ends. The second chapter opens with Marlowe. One evening, Marlowe rests on his steamship. He overhears the general manager talking with his uncle about Karst. They are annoyed that Karst has so much influence in the company and sends back so much ivory. The general manager also mentions a trader who lives near Karst and is apparently stealing company's profit. The uncle advises the general manager to just hang the trader. The general manager angrily mentions Karst's conviction that the station should be focused much on humanizing and civilizing the savages as on trade. The general manager's uncle advises him to trust the jungle, which kills off so many people, will eventually remove Karst from manager's way of success. A few days later, the general manager's uncle and his El Dorado expedition head into the jungle. Marlowe later heard that all their donkeys died, but never heard what happened to the less valuable animals, the black men. After 3 months of work, Marlowe finishes repairing the ship. He immediately sets off upriver with the general manager, a few company agents whom Marlowe called pilgrims, and 30 cannibals as crew. Marlowe prefers the cannibals, who don't actually eat each other, and of whom he says they were men I could work with. They are primitive and simple, so they are not hollow. The trip is long and difficult. Marlowe describes the jungle as a thing monstrous and free, and the natives as beings who howled and lived and made horrid faces. Yet Marlowe feels some connection to the terrible frankness of the natives, knowing that he had some of the primitiveness in his own heart. 50 miles from Karst headquarters at the inner station, the ship comes across a hut with a stack of firewood outside. They stop to collect the firewood and discover a note that says, "Wood for you, hurry up, approach cautiously." It is signed illegibly, but with a name too long to be cursed. The general manager concludes the hut must belong to the trader he wants to hang. Inside the hut, Marlowe discovers a book called An Inquiry into Some Points of Steamship that seems to have code written on it. 80 miles from the inner station, the general manager orders Marlowe to anchor the ship in the middle of the river for the night. Marlowe wants to continue on to meet Karst, but knows that stopping is the safer thing to do. The morning reveals a thick white blinding fog enveloping the ship. A roar of screaming natives break the silence. Frightened pilgrims hold their rifles at the ready, but can't see anything. The cannibals, those strangers to this area, remains calm and self-controlled. They want to catch and eat the men on the riverbank. This reminds Marlowe that the cannibals must be incredibly hungry, as they have not received any food for weeks, and marvels at their self-restraint. He surprises why they have not tried to kill any of the white men. After 2 hours, the fog lifts and the steamship continues upstream. A little over a mile from the inner station, the natives on shore attack the steamship with arrows from the jungle. Marlowe shuts the shutter of the pilot house and orders his black helmsman to steer straight. The pilgrims blindly open fire at the bush, putting out the smoke that blocks Marlowe's vision. So does the black helmsman. He drops the wheel, opens the shutter of the pilot house, and fires out the window. Marlowe jumps to take the wheel and avoid the snag ahead. The helmsman falls back from the window and dies as a spear hits his side. Marlowe pulls the ship's steam whistle, which terrifies the natives and drives them off. Marlowe realizes Karst is probably dead and feels an intense disappointment at the thought. Suddenly Marlowe once again cuts short his story in order to address the men who are on the nail in the Thames. He compares the situation of the white man in his own society and that of Karst in the jungle. In his own environment, the white man is protected from his own worst instincts by the butcher who satisfied his appetite, and the policeman who keeps alive his fear of scandal, and the gallows, and of the lunatic asylum. In the jungle, there is none to restrain the instincts of civilized people. So, in the jungle, Karst was incapable of restraining his lust for possession. Marlowe adds that all Europeans had contributed to the making of Karst and that he had been asked by the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs to write a report for its guidance. Marlowe has read the report, which was obviously written before Karst was transformed from a man of European enlightenment to a man who presided over unspeakable, horrid, savage rites and accepted sacrifices made in his honor. The report ominously started with the assertion that whites must necessarily appear to savages as supernatural beings. Yet, Marlowe confesses that he was greatly impressed by the report until he reached the postscript, clearly written much later, which read, "Exterminate all brutes." Reflecting on this inner contradiction, Marlowe concludes that Karst was not worth the helmsman's life lost for him. Marlowe mourns his helmsman deeply. The man had done something. He had steered. The reference to the helmsman brings him back to the main strand of his narrative. Everyone on the board assumes the inner station has been overrun and Karst killed. Shortly afterwards, they arrive at inner station. Marlowe and the other men on the ship are amazed to discover it in perfect shape. They are met on shore by a white man wearing clothes covered in colorful patches. Marlowe thinks the man looks like a harlequin, a clown or jester. He has a boy's face. He is 25 years old and is a Russian sailor. He calls the natives simple people. He knows that the steamship has been attacked but says it's alright now. The man tells Marlowe that he worked for various colonial powers and ended up wandering through the Congo alone for 2 years. When the Russian says that the hut with the statue was his old house, Marlowe returns the book about sailing to him. The Russian in his joy tells Marlowe that the natives attacked the ship because they don't want Karst to live. It is soon clear to Marlowe that the Russian highly admires Karst. The Russian says about Karst, "This man has enlarged my mind." Here the second chapter ends. Marlowe stares at the Russian in astonishment and thinks that the Russian surely wants nothing from the wilderness and that he is the only white man in colonial Africa not looking for money or power. Without the will to dominate, he seems safe from the corruption. Marlowe envies his spirit of adventure but not his thoughtless admiration of Karst. Meanwhile, the Russian begs Marlowe to take Karst away quickly. He tells of his first meeting with Karst, in which Karst talked of everything and the Russian only listened. Since then, he says he has nursed Karst through 2 illnesses, even though Karst had once threatened to shoot him over some ivory. Though he is reluctant to tell the whole truth, Marlowe gradually makes out that after Karst has no more goods to trade with, Karst raided the country for ivory with the help of the local tribesmen, who adores him as their god. This comes as troubling news to Marlowe, who had expected that Karst, with his morals, would trade for ivory, not take it by force. Here is Marlowe's first solid evidence that Karst has abandoned his morals. The Russian says that Karst can't be judged as other men are. He adds that Karst suffered too much. He hated all this and somehow could not get away. Marlowe meanwhile lifts binoculars to his eyes and looks at the building where he thinks Karst is lying ill. He is startled to see that what he thought were fence posts are actually spiked human heads. The Harlequin asserts that the head on the stakes are those of rebels. Marlowe tells the men on the nail that for all Karst's magnificent talent, eloquence and learning, he was hollow at the core, and the jungle filled that hollowness. The Russian mentions that when the native chiefs came to see Karst, they crawled up to him. This information disgusts Marlowe. The Russian can't understand Marlowe's scorn at Karst's savage action. He says that the company abandoned Karst, who had such wonderful ideas. The naive Russian can't see past Karst's eloquence to the hollowness within. At this juncture, the pilgrims come out of the house bearing Karst on a stretcher. Marlowe describes Karst as looking like an animated image of death carved out of ivory. The natives swarm forward. The Russian whispers to Marlowe that if Karst says the word, they will all be killed. Karst speaks and the natives disappear into the jungle. Karst is laid down in one of the ship's small cabin and the manager joins him. Along the shore of the river, near the ship, the natives gather. Next to the ship, a savage and superb African woman appears. The Russian comments about her imply that she was Karst's mistress. Karst was so transformed by the jungle, he even betrayed his intended. Marlowe's conversation with the Harlequin is interrupted by Karst's loud protest. He accuses the general manager of caring less about Karst himself than about the ivory Karst has, and also says that the general manager with his unimportant ideas is interfering with Karst's grand plans. Somehow, Karst will seize himself as a man of great ideas, just as civilized Europeans continue to see colonialism as noble while it abuses the Africans and steals their wealth. The general manager exits from the cabin. He tells Marlowe that Karst is very ill and that Karst's unsound methods ruined the district for the company. Marlowe feels that Karst's methods couldn't be unsound because he seemed to have had no method at all. Yet Marlowe is more disgusted by the general manager's false show of sadness at Karst's illness, his show of false civility, than with Karst's atrocities, cruelties, and says that Karst is still a remarkable man. In Karst, though there was monstrousness, there was no lie. When Marlowe is alone, the Russian informs Marlowe that he has decided to escape as he is in danger from the general manager and his men, and seeing nothing more that he can do for Karst. But before departing, he tells Marlowe that it was Karst who ordered the natives to attack on the steamship because he hated the idea of being taken away from his station. Marlowe gives him some supplies and the Harlequin disappears into the night. Marlowe goes to sleep but wakes suddenly just after midnight. Marlowe perceives red gleams of fire in the dark forest and hears the sound of a drumbeat and the yells of the natives. Marlowe enters Karst's room and found he had escaped. He found Karst crawling through the grass just before he reaches the native camp. Marlowe realizes that though he is stronger than Karst, all Karst has to do is call out and the natives will attack. Karst, realizing the same thing, tells him to hide. Marlowe says, "You will be lost, utterly lost." Karst pauses, struggling with himself. This is the climax of Heart of Darkness. With the words, "You will be lost," Marlowe forces Karst to battle in his own soul, to choose between his savage monstrousness and his civilized dreams of advancement and accomplishment. Karst ultimately chooses civilization and allows Marlowe to support him back to the ship. The next day, the ship departs. Karst, in the pilot house with Marlowe, watches the natives and his mistress come to the shore. Marlowe spots the pilgrims pointing their rifles to the shore and blows the steam whistle to scare the natives away. All the natives but the black woman disperse. She puts up her arm and shouts something. The pilgrims then open fire on Karst's followers, blocking Marlowe's vision with the smoke. The boat now travels swiftly downstream. The general manager is pleased. After all, soon Karst will die and the general manager will be secured in his position without having to do a thing. Marlowe is often left alone with Karst, who continues to talk of his ideas, plans, station and career. Karst gave Marlowe a packet of papers and a photograph and asked him to keep it for him, out of reach of the manager. The steamship soon breaks down, which doesn't surprise Marlowe. But Karst becomes concerned he won't live to see Europe. He tells Marlowe that he is waiting for death. Suddenly Karst cries out in a voice not much more than a breath, "The horror, the horror." A short while later, the general manager's servant appears and informs everyone, Mr. Cursed, he dead. Cursed was buried in the jungle the next day. Stricken by Cursed death, Marlowe almost considered suicide. Soon after, Marlowe himself falls ill. He is embarrassed to discover that on his deathbed, he could not think of anything to say. That's why he admires Cursed. The man had something to say, the horror. Marlowe describes Cursed's statement as a moral victory. Through the corruption of his ideals, Cursed saw the world as it was. Marlowe returns to Brussels, where his aunt nurses him back to health but can't soothe his mind. The people of the city seem to him petty and silly. They have never seen the jungle and can't see the hollowness of their civilization. A representative of the company comes to receive Cursed papers from Marlowe, who offers him only on the suppression of savage customs, the book written by Marlowe, with the scroll exterminate all the brutes torn off to protect Cursed reputation. The representative, wanting something more profitable, leaves disappointedly. The same greed visible in the company agents is visible in the company representative. Cursed's cousin soon shows up. The cousin, a musician, tells Marlowe that Cursed was himself a great musician, then leaves with some family letters Marlowe gives him. Soon after, a journalist stops by. He says Cursed was not a great writer, but was a great speaker. He could have been a great radical political leader. He could electrify a crowd. Marlowe asks which party Cursed would have belonged to. The journalists say, any party. Cursed could convince himself of anything. These statements suggest Cursed hollowness. He takes on the suppression of savage customs for publication. At last, Marlowe decides to go to see Cursed intended and give her the last of his letters. He notices that though it's a year after Cursed's death, she is still dressed in mourning black. She believes Cursed is a great man, both talented and moral, and asks Marlowe to tell her Cursed's last words. Marlowe can't destroy her beautiful delusions. He says Cursed's last words were her name. She cries out that she knew it and begins to weep. Marlowe feels only despair. On the ship in the Thames, Marlowe falls silent, and as the narrator stares out from the ship, it seems to him that the Thames leads into the heart of an immense darkness. Here the novel ends. Now let's go back to the question. If you have listened carefully this lesson, you will already know the answer. The correct answer is option 2, the brickmaker. And his name suggests that he is a hollow man, hollow to the core. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.